Hello again. I'm sure that everybody watching this video will have heard of Emily Davison, the most famous suffragette of them all, who sacrificed her life for the cause and is as a result held in reverence even by those who know little about the suffragettes. What very few know, though, is that she was also a fanatical terrorist who was responsible for detonating the first terrorist bomb in 20th century England. Nor are most people aware that it was she who began the campaign of arson which swept across Britain between 1912 and 1914. How many people know that she inflicted grievous bodily harm on Herbert Jones, the rider of the horse which she caused to throw him, nor that he ended by committing suicide himself and claimed to be haunted by the death for which he was inadvertently responsible? The average person will certainly not know that as a working man, Jones was not entitled to vote any more than the suffragettes were. The same was true of 40% of men at that time. Chancellor of the Exchequer Lloyd George was having a house built for himself near the golf course at Walton-on-the-Hill in Surrey. The men working on the house arrived each morning at 6:30 and left at 5:30. On the evening of February the 18th, 1913, the workmen left as usual in the evening and secured the property behind them. There was, however, one small and unfinished window on the ground floor which could not be fully closed. It was later guessed that a boy or a slim woman might have been able to squeeze through this window and then possibly open another window to let in accomplices. Cards were something of a rarity at that time. A number of witnesses were woken by the sound of a motor vehicle driving to Walton in the early hours of the morning of February the 19th. The car was also heard by a police officer who noted that it arrived in Walton at about 10 to 3 in the morning. Cars were sufficiently rare at this time to draw attention, particularly at night. He also heard a vehicle, possibly the same one, driving back towards London 2 hours later. It was unusual to hear a car driving about at that time, but nothing more was thought of it. At 6:10 in the morning, the windows of the Blue Ball pub in Walton were rattled by a loud explosion. 20 minutes later, James Gray, foreman of the builders, arrived at the house that he and his men had almost completed and found a scene of devastation. The ceilings had been brought down by an explosion, windows blown out, and the force of the blast had even cracked open an external brick wall. 5 rooms were wrecked. The police were called and discovered that 2 bombs had been planted in the house. The method used to trigger the explosion was primitive in the extreme. A paraffin-soaked rag led from a bomb to a saucer of wood shavings, which had also been sprinkled with paraffin. A candle was then placed in this saucer and lit. When it burned down far enough, it would set fire to the wood shavings and then ignite the rag, which acted as a fuse. 2 bombs had actually been planted in the house, but the explosion of the first had blown out the candle, which was meant to trigger the second. The unexploded bomb consisted of 5 pounds of gunpowder, surrounded with nails to make it more destructive. Anybody who had been in the house at the time of the explosion would have had a good chance of being killed. And if any of those workmen had arrived 20 minutes earlier, they would almost certainly have been killed in the explosion. The woman who planted this bomb was Emily Davison, as Sylvia Pankhurst explained years later in her memoirs. This is not something which most of us would associate with that famous martyr for the cause of women's suffrage. I've put quite a long piece about Emily Davison on my Substack account, and I give a link to it in the description to this video. It's very detailed, far more detailed than I can really make a video on YouTube, and it gives a very surprising view of her, more surprising perhaps than the one usually finds. It's free to read, just click on the link.